Hello and welcome to The Savage Truth. I am your host, Absolute Katy. It's my pleasure to join you on the internet today for my show where I will talk about media, politics, the truth, and perception. So let's get right into it. Today, I want to talk about Lee Camp and an article that he wrote recently in response to an NPR hit piece against him. If you're not familiar with Lee Camp and his show Redacted tonight on RT America, I highly recommend you check him out. Recently, Lee Camp and Redacted Tonight have been in the crosshairs of the mainstream media. There have been a number of hit pieces on him from the New York Times in which he wrote an article in response to that. I highly recommend you read that as well. But particularly this piece that he wrote in response to NPR's hit piece is a really great reminder about how mainstream media uses language to manipulate. So in the NPR piece, the first thing that Scott Simon does is he creates a subconscious link between Redacted Tonight and Lee Camp and old Cold War Russian propaganda. He says, Russian programming is no longer breathless proclamations about tractor production or accolades to the Kremlin. Look at a show like Redacted Tonight. Now, just right there, as Lee points out, he's not saying that Redacted Tonight is Russian propaganda, but he's putting two ideas right next to each other and allowing you to make the connection that isn't there. So the second step is lie by omission. Although Scott Simon does admit that Lee Camp is an American, he only covers that in the very beginning. So if you were coming into this piece, after the first 30 seconds, there's no way that you would have the context to know that Lee Camp is an American journalist and comedian. There's nothing in Lee Camp's show that is pro-Russia, Russian propaganda, or anything of the sort. He talks about human rights issues, covered the Dakota Access Pipeline when nobody in the mainstream media was doing it, our corporate oligarchy, and the corruption of our two-party system. How is that Russian propaganda? Moving on. Step 3, subtly let your listeners know the target is not one of us. In his second sentence, Simon says, the show is hosted and written by an American comic in black jeans with a hipster beard and long bobbed hair, Lee Camp. He looks a little more like, Jesus. Hipster Jesus. But as he points out, if Lee Camp has a hipster beard, then I suppose that means Wolf Blitzer has a hipster beard too. But that's not the point of the article. The point of the article is to place the audience apart from Lee Camp so that they can then judge him without feeling like he's just another human being out for our common interest. Step 4, imply that curse words equals enemy of the state. So Simon next plays a few sentences from Lee Camp's show, bleeping out the word I might be an enemy of the state too here. Step 5, bring in an expert who clarifies how awful the target is. This is a very common tactic of the mainstream media. In this case, Julia Ioffe is brought on to explain how horrible Redacted Tonight is, and she's identified as someone who writes critically about Russia for The Atlantic and other platforms. Now, what they don't tell you is that this expert who's going to comment on, apparently she's a comedy expert, is totally compromised and working for and working with companies that profit off of war. And that is absolutely common in the mainstream media, where they bring on retired generals who are on the board of directors of giant weapons companies to talk about how the war will help people. I mean, it's a total conflict of interest. It's just selling the public war, and it's no different here. Step 6, shrug off or ignore any positive attributes. At one point, Scott Simon talks about attending a taping of the show where the audience laughed and cheered when prompted. But seriously. In the audio version, the words "but seriously" are dripping with disgust, as if all of these people are just sheep, they can't think for themselves. That's what's intended, but seriously. Who believes this shit? I'd like to say that about Scott Simon. Who believes this shit? In doing that, Scott Simon is completely ignoring the fact that Redacted Tonight has a very large, active, and excited fan base of people who see through the ridiculous mainstream media and want something more, something deeper. Now, this is the crux of Lee's show. He's speaking truth to power, and the power elites want to discredit him. They want to minimize his viewers, and so that's exactly what this piece is trying to do. Step 7, bring in another expert to simply lie. Scott Simon next asks executive producer of Second City, Kelly Leonard, if Redacted Tonight is funny. I don't even want to get into the absurdity of that question and asking an expert to come on and say whether or not a show is funny. Did you laugh? Then it's fucking funny. Step 8, simply call your target evil. Leonard next says, I think comedy is a superpower. If it can be used for evil, it's not a superpower. And in this case, that's kind of what I feel is going on. Basically calling Lee Camp evil because his comedy turns really tragic corruption of our government into something that we can laugh about instead of just cry about. I think that is kind of a superpower. Step 9, refuse to have the target on for a live interview. The number one question I've gotten about NPR's attack piece was about this sentence by Simon. We asked Lee Camp for an interview but couldn't agree to his ground rules. Simon is being intentionally vague here, Lee says. Saying that we wouldn't agree to ground rules makes the listener think that Lee said, I'll do an interview but no questions about Russia, and you have to be dressed as a chicken during the entirety of it. In fact, what Simon doesn't reveal to his listeners is that Lee simply said, I would love to do a live on-air interview. That is all he said. NPR cannot have me on for a live on-air interview because that would not allow them to cut out all the things they don't want viewers to know. So this is also a very common tactic in the mainstream media. They'll do an interview with somebody. In fact, NPR did this to Jill Stein just a few months ago. There was a whole interview that she did, and when she talked about a certain topic, they cut it out completely and made her look like a batty old coot. It was very bizarre, and when you watch the original and then compare it with the edited version, it's very clear that they did not want the public to hear her opinion on a certain topic. That's definitely what's going on here, because when they have Lee Camp in live interviews, he says things that make sense. He says things that people respond to and agree with, and they can't have that in the mainstream media because it just weakens their power over the narrative. Step 10, bring back the new Cold War faux expert. Our good friend Julia Ioffe, standing for big weapons, comes back and calls Lee and his team co-conspirators. She says they're not creating the show for the rights and the lives of the little man or the little person. It's for Putin's power. Lee Camp has been doing stand-up comedy. He had his own show, little YouTube show, way back. He used to write for The Onion. He's been doing the same thing for a long, long time. This is not new what he's doing. And RT America gave him a platform. That's the only reason he's on there, because nobody else is giving people like Lee Camp a platform to talk truth to power. All the other media companies, the 6 companies that own all of our corporate media, they don't want people talking truth to power because they are power. So that's exactly why he's on RT America and why I'm glad he's there. Step 11, one last parting lie. No one's watching anyway. This is the biggest lie. People are watching. Lee Camp has a huge following. Free thinkers, people who just want to get other information and other news besides what kind of glass Donald Trump is drinking out of or how big some Kardashian's ass has gotten this week. I don't know. Call me crazy. Go ahead. I'll take it. But I want to know about other opinions. I want to know about things that the mainstream media aren't telling me, and I am not alone. Thank you for joining me on The Savage Truth. I am your host, Absolute Katy. If you liked my show, please subscribe and share it with your friends. And find me on Twitter at Absolute Katy. I will be back soon with another episode. I hope you join me then. And always think for yourself.